Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on education-led growth. We actually have a series of back-to-back webinars today, so you're joining us for the first one here on the education-led growth maturity model. Before we jump in, just want to do some quick housekeeping. The first thing is that this webinar is being recorded. So if you need to jump off at some point, you want to share it with someone, you want to come back and take more notes, you are welcome to do that. I'm also going to give you the heads up that the slides for this webinar are underneath the video. So if you want to download those for future reference, you are more than welcome to. I see that someone has already dropped a comment in the Q&A box, but again, underneath this video is a questions box, and you can use that not only for questions, but you can also use that to communicate with us, say hello, tell us where you're calling in from. We'd also love to hear, why are you here today? What are you hoping to learn? So we think about this idea of education-led growth and growing in maturity in that. What's top of mind for you? What do you want to learn about? Also underneath this video, you'll find an area where you can give us some feedback. You can rate this session and give us some feedback. We read all of that and we use that to figure out future topics and how we can better serve you with these monthly webinars. The last thing I'll say is that in this platform, the video size will kind of automatically adjust based on internet bandwidth. So if we look a little grainy right now, that might be what's happening. If you go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you click on the gear icon, you should be able to manually override that. And you're going to want that for future slides so that you can see those fresh and clean. So without further ado, I'll go ahead, I'll introduce myself and my colleague here, Anderson. My name is Shannon Howard. I'm the Director of Customer and Content Marketing here at Intellum. And kind of just have a background in kind of started my corporate career in curriculum development for an online school, and I've kind of been in marketing, content marketing, customer marketing, and education onboarding. And then Anderson, I'll let you introduce yourself real quick.
Yeah, thanks. Anderson Campbell, and I lead the product marketing function here at Intellum. Love talking about education and especially how education connects to business outcomes. My background before I was in product marketing, I actually spent almost 20 years in and around higher education, doing everything from program administration all the way to teaching students from 18 years old to 80 years old. So I love the process of education and transformation that happens when people learn, almost regardless of what the subject matter is. So really excited to talk about this kind of intersection between education programs, business outcomes, and how we can be more strategic about pushing our craft forward.
Awesome. Well, and we just figured that we would go ahead and give you the heads up here that today we're going to introduce you to not just the maturity model, but also what is education-led growth in general. When we say that, what do we mean? But Anderson and I would consider ourselves more stewards of this concept, right? So education-led growth is not something that we've made up and it came out of nowhere. But I think as you hear this framework and we talked more about it earlier this year, you'll see that this it makes sense when you work in education. It makes sense. It kind of puts into words what a lot of us know from experience or running programs like this. And so our hope here is to give you language to be able to communicate to the business how education can drive measurable business impact. But we also don't have all the answers, right? I think the amazing thing about education is that as the world changes, education changes, right? Like how we learn, how we teach, how we educate changes, our products change, our industries change. And so that requires us to learn, to grow, and then kind of turn around and share that with other people. So we are going to do our best today to kind of walk through this, and we'll do some Q&A later, but we also want to hear from you. You all are in the trenches doing this work, and we really are better together. So if you have thoughts, ideas, please contribute those using that questions box below. All right. So Anderson, if you want to kick us off and just talk us through, when we say education-led growth, what is that? What does that mean?
Yeah. So it's a term that describes, I think, something that, as you've said, we're just stewards of, we're putting language to, but most of you who are in the room right now have already experienced, and this is kind of what you eat and breathe every day. So the big idea around education-led growth, and you can see it on the screen there, but it's a strategic outcomes-focused approach that repositions education from being maybe a nice to have or a necessary to have, almost support function, to something that is a core driver of strategic business outcomes. So this is about reframing for the business, and maybe even reframing for yourself, education out of this kind of silo that sits apart from all of the rest of the go-to-market functions that touch customers and that drive the business forward, and really about embedding education into business strategy, so that the effort that you're putting into building education and learning programs is targeting and contributing to the business outcomes. And we'll look at these in just a second, but the business outcomes that the rest of the business is trying to drive forward. So we're going to get off of the sideline and into the game, into those go-to-market conversations, and start raising our hand and showing how we're driving the same kind of business outcomes in measurable, provable ways that sales is trying to drive, and marketing and customer success, and kind of the list goes on and on there. We think that, and you know that when education's designed and it's measured in intentional ways, it can become a really powerful business growth lever and move it out of that stigma of just being sort of an afterthought. We've sold this product, or we've hired these people, or we've onboarded these partners, and I guess now we need to teach them what to do with that. No, we can be strategic from the moment that someone comes into our organization or into our partner network or buys our product. We can be strategic about educating them and equipping them to really have success for our organization and for themselves. So there are 4 business outcomes that we look at education programs mapping to. And so let's look at each one of those, and I'll just kind of give an overview, because I think it's a helpful framework for understanding what we're trying to map our education initiatives up to, and the language that the business is using anyway. So we gotta become more versed ourselves in business outcomes, so that we can have the right language and context to speak to the rest of the business, to speak to C-level leadership. I saw a question already come in. We'll maybe address that towards the end, of how do you even get C-level buy-in? Part of the answer of that is learning how the C-level executives speak, the things that they care about, and then mapping your work up to driving those needles. So what are those business outcomes that organizations care about, and that we're trying to impact with education programs? That's like what's that intersection, or that Venn diagram? Well, we've done some research around this. If you haven't downloaded our education-led growth report, would highly suggest that you grab that resource and that asset, because we dive into this topic of business outcomes and education-led growth a lot more deeply. But when we were assessing the data around that report, we found that these were the 4 business outcomes that most education programs are trying to drive in a meaningful way. So retention, 84% of the programs that we surveyed are looking to drive some sort of customer renewal rate or loyalty through education. We consistently see that same dynamic in partner education and in employee education. Well-educated partners will stay engaged and will renew with the business. Well-educated employees, as you know, more likely to stay and to be retained by the business and grow within their capacity within the organization. So just retaining customers, retaining partners, retaining employees, that is a big business outcome that education can not only support, but can really drive measurable success in. Growth is another area. 70% of the programs that we surveyed are targeting growth outcomes. And these are things like accelerating sales cycles, nurturing prospects, driving expansion opportunities for the business, primarily through things like customer education, but also through partner enablement and employee-led growth initiatives, sales enablement, internal upskilling. So whether you're talking about growing the breadth of your customer base, or growing the spend within your customers through driving them to understand your product and how to use your product to achieve their outcomes better, or you're talking about growing revenue from partners or the capacity of your own employees, growth is a pretty meaningful outcome for your education programs to measurably drive. The third one you see on the screen there is performance. 75% of the programs that we looked at and surveyed are looking to improve things like operational performance and productivity and efficiency Again, not only for how customers might use the product that you're selling, but also the performance of employees and the performance of your partners. They play critical roles in delivering business outcomes. So in this increasingly do more with less environment, we see a lot of education programs that are wanting to turn every customer into a superstar user of their product, drive win rates for partners up, and drive sales cycle lengths for partners down, increase the efficiency and productivity of their employees at every level of the organization. So performance is a big measurable outcome that education can drive. And then, excuse me, the last one that we saw was cost reduction. About 57% of the programs that we surveyed are actively trying to figure out, how do we use education to drive down and reduce the costs of the business so that we can optimize and scale our impact and scale the way that education touches other areas of the business. Primarily, we see this through education being used as a lever to drive down support tickets from customers, but you can also drive down other kinds of costs. You can a well-structured education program, as you all know, can really shorten the onboarding time of employees. Recently ran across a study from SHRM that looked at a couple of organizations who went from kind of ad hoc employee onboarding programs to structured employee onboarding programs with measurable outcomes. And they cut their onboarding time down from 4 months to 2 months. That's 2 months of extra productivity from those employees in the first year. That adds up to reduced cost and improved performance really, really quickly. So whether you're talking about support tickets or onboarding time for employees or partners, or just scaling expertise across the ecosystem, reducing costs is increasingly one of the business outcomes that education program leaders like you are trying to figure out how to drive and how to quantify. So this is kind of broad targeting across customers, partners, and employees. And I think these business outcomes reflect the ways that education-led growth programs can and should drive impact across the entire business ecosystem, and not for just one audience, not just for employees or just for customers or just for partners, but really looking holistically at all of the people that could be and should be educated throughout your organization and who your organization touches. So with all that in mind, we took thanks, Shannon. We took a lot of the information about education programs and said, how are those programs built, and is there a framework that we can provide that might be helpful in thinking through strategically, how do you build an education program that drives growth and that can be mapped to those business outcomes? And this is the framework that we've put together. Again, I love how Shannon introduced us more as stewards of this and not the innovators and creators here. My guess is that if you look at this slide or you read the education-led growth ebook that we put together, you're probably like a lot of head nodding, like this is not new stuff to you, but maybe we're giving you a little bit of a different language to empower you to speak to your colleagues and to speak to your executives about how education can drive growth. So these 7 pillars here are pillars that we've developed over years of working with folks like you, people that are working in customer and partner and employee education. And what we've done here is to put them in an order that maybe structures them well. But these, even though they're kind of laid out in a sequence, as you all know, like there's a lot of overlap here. That this is maybe a logical order to think through the different pillars of building out an education program, but these are not mutually exclusive, and they don't have to be worked through and achieved in any particular order. They're presented here only to help us think through each of them. And so I'll really quickly just go through maybe a little definition of what each of these 7 are, and then what that little arrow is along the bottom there. So starting on the very left, outcomes. Here we just mean like you start a good education-led growth program starts by defining the business outcomes that you want to impact. Those things we saw on the previous slide. Is your program trying to impact growth or retention or performance or cost savings? And how? How does your program, how is it meant to drive measurable success in one or more of those areas? The second thing that you need to clarify for yourself for a successful program is your audience. Trying to understand as much as you can who your learners are. Are they customers, or are they partners, or are they employees? Tailor your experiences, the learning objectives, the course content, the certifications to the needs of that particular audience and the life cycle stage that they're in with their career or with your particular product or in their partner training. So trying to really understand who your audience is. This is very similar and analogous to the kind of persona work that someone in sales or marketing would do. They try to understand deeply the person that they're trying to engage. And that's no different in education. So understanding your audience. The third pillar there is a pillar of your initiatives. When you look at each program that you're going to stand up within your education umbrella, onboarding, enablement, your certifications programs, compliance programs are another big one, leadership development. All of these are different initiatives that group together learning objectives and outcomes and courses. And so really trying to define what each of those initiatives are so that they can be measured against the business outcomes that you have identified for your program. Resources is another one. I think this is one of the ones, there's only a couple on here that I really think get overlooked by folks. Resources is one of the ones that I think deserves more intentionality and treatment around it. This is ensuring that you have the right team and tools and content to be able to scale your programs successfully. So taking a step back and saying, if we have measurable outcomes for these audiences that are mapped to specific initiatives, what is everything we're going to need to be able to pull this off, to put this program together? And so that could be people assets, like what's the composition of your team that you need? It can be the tools that you give that team, the budget that you need. So all of the resources that are necessary to stand up and grow an education program, because like other areas of the business, you're not hoping to just get this off the ground and like it's one and done. You want to get this off the ground and then scale the impact. And you're going to need resources to be able to do that. So being able to be thoughtful and strategic about the resources that you need to build and to scale your program. Delivery looks at how you actually get that education into the hands of your desired audiences, how those initiatives manifest themselves. So that's looking at the different kinds of learning and delivery formats, from live courses to on-demand courses, whether or not you embed learning in the product, is it going to have a community component to it? How do you meet your learners where they are and engage them in the kind of learning that will be most effective to them? So you can see how these things start to overlap, right? You can't understand how to deliver your program if you don't understand your audience and the initiatives that you're trying to drive. Marketing is the next one there, the sixth pillar. Marketing is the other one that I think probably doesn't get as much treatment as it should. And this is really just trying to drive the adoption of your program. So great content isn't enough. As much as I wish there was kind of like a field of dreams mentality where if you just build it, they will come. We've tried that, right? And it doesn't work. You build these wonderful courses, they look great, they're engaging, and then like nobody signs up for them. That's essentially a marketing problem. And I know most of you aren't marketers. That's okay. There are still marketing techniques that you can employ to drive the adoption of your product and or your onboarding programs or your partner enablement programs, like whatever your audience is. And there are different challenges for different types of programs and different initiatives. And again, that gets back into like understanding your audience. Compulsory employee onboarding, like that maybe deserves less marketing treatment and less of a marketing plan because they get assigned to the courses. And if they want to get paid, they got to take them, right? That maybe deserves less marketing than a partner onboarding program where you're really trying to say, hey, if you've signed up with to be a partner with us, if we have an agreement with you, we want to help you learn the most you can about our products and how to sell those products or services. But we need to make sure that we're trying to reach every partner seller that is within our network. And so how do we even make them aware that we have this program or these assets to support them? So thinking through awareness and driving adoption and learner acquisition. And then finally, measurement. And this, we're becoming more and more data driven, which I love. But many of us, we know education, we don't know data analytics, but we have to increase our own competencies a little bit. This is about tracking those business outcomes. And I think this challenges us to move beyond course completions and course engagement rates. Those are good baseline starting metrics, but we really need to show how we're moving the needle in those business outcomes that we mapped to. And so there's going to be a little bit of translation of data there and a data-driven story that we have to tell. So we need to start measuring things that are deeper than merely course completions or how many people have passed a particular assessment. And then along the bottom there, I'll kind of wrap up this slide and hand it over to Shannon for kind of our next topic. But you notice how there's this line that goes back to the left that says continuous improvement. Education-led growth, it's an iterative process. And I kind of said that in the beginning of this particular slide, that these are laid out in a linear way, but that maybe isn't the best way to think of them because they kind of weave in and out of one another. You don't master one pillar and then move over to the next of them. You're really trying to evolve all of these at the same time as your program continuously matures. Maybe if you think of like, okay, some of you are old enough to remember like boom boxes and how they have those little like equalizer knobs on them. Others of you have seen it in TV or movies or whatever. But you know, those little knobs, you've got like all these different frequencies and you move them up and down until you create the perfect sound mix for the song or the album that you're listening to in your own personal tastes. I think about these pillars in the same kind of way. You're going to kind of tweak and move these up and down. Some of them deserve more attention than others. And as you change one, it may necessitate that you make a change in another to balance things out. So the configuration of how much time and effort and resources that you're putting into any one of these given pillars at a time is going to change. And as you measure the results of your outcomes, those two pillars on either end, the results that you have are going to then kind of loop back and inform how you are articulating your outcomes for a program or what you need to do to market the program better or differently. Or maybe it refines who your audience is. You maybe presumed a particular thing about your audience of learners and you learn through the delivery of your content that you're not reaching that set of audience members, but it includes this other different set of folks that you hadn't considered before. So this all kind of moves and shifts and shapes together to create a program that is uniquely yours, but still driving business outcomes. And I think that brings us to our next topic is like, how do you know where your program stands today in each of these pillars, and then what to focus on next. If you're trying to drive all of these things and you know that you have the limited capacity to really only move a couple of those sliders, what ought you focus on at this point in time to try to move the needle in those business outcomes? And that's where I want to hand it over to Shannon, because she's going to start talking a little bit about the ELG maturity model and an assessment, excuse me, an assessment that we've developed that can help you guide your progress over time. So Shannon, I'll hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Well, thanks for walking us through that, Anderson. And hopefully some of you, as Anderson said, were nodding vigorously. I know when we walked through this earlier this year, that was kind of the feedback that we got, which is great. It means, you know, like our goal is not to create something wildly new, but really just to codify these things that most of us are doing. So same here with the education-led growth maturity model is a couple of years ago, someone had asked, you know, is there a maturity model for our industry? And yes and no. There are some, they don't always fit certain use cases. And a lot of them kind of lump our program as one whole thing, right? And so it looks at the entirety of a program and it puts it in maybe a stage of maturity. And we felt like that doesn't really accurately represent a program, right? Because you may have a very advanced, maybe audience strategy, delivery strategy, content strategy, but measurement is something that you struggle with, right? So putting your whole program at one advanced stage may not reflect that measurement pillar of the education-led growth framework there. So the idea behind the education-led growth maturity model is to help you look at those 7 pillars of the education-led growth framework and see where you are, like where do you fall today, and then what does the next level look like? And so this is where I said, if your screen looks blurry, you're going to want to zoom in, but also for your like ease of use access of this, you can find a PDF of this underneath the video. So in the attachment section under the video that you're watching right now, scroll a little and you'll see it there. You can download this. Now, 2 ways that you can use this maturity model. 1, you can print this bad boy out and you can start a circle, like what looks and sounds like you in your program. But also underneath this video, you'll find a maturity model assessment. And we put that together just to be a short assessment. It's going to ask you a few questions to help you figure out where you fall. And it'll generate for you kind of a scorecard that tells you which maturity stage you fall into, next steps, like what would it look like to take the next step to get to the next level? And then it's going to recommend some content that we've put together to help you take those next steps, right? So our goal here is not just to figure out where are we today, but also how do we keep you moving forward? So how do we look at this maturity model? On the left-hand side, you'll see those 7 pillars of the education-led growth framework. Valerie said, will a transcript and slides be available? I need to look into the transcript, Valerie, but the slides are underneath the video already. So you can go ahead and download all of them and the maturity model itself. So on the left-hand side, those 7 pillars of the education-led growth framework, across the top, you have 4 stages of maturity. So going from ad hoc to foundational to strategic and transformational. And so a lot of our programs, they start ad hoc, right? There's some business problem that needs to be solved. We realize that some component of education is part of that solution and we create, but it's a little reactive, right? That's where every program starts. When we become more foundational, we're starting to think more about what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Do we have some systems in place? Strategic is where we're really maybe implementing this whole model. And then like with any maturity model, very few companies are going to end up in that transformational category of we're leading the way and we're paving the way for the future, but it's a great thing for us to aspire to. And so I know the text is going to be hard here, so go ahead and download your own copy, but I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this one part on measurement and optimization. So you can see a little bit of like, what does this look like when you zoom in? So if we look at that measurement and optimization pillar, and we're going from left to right, and we start off with maybe that basic tracking like Anderson was talking about. Maybe we're able to track attendance at instructor-led, virtual instructor-led training. We're able to see course completions, certifications awarded, more of those basic learner engagement metrics, maybe something that our LMS is providing. At the foundational level, we're maybe able to tie to some kind of business impact metric, right? So maybe it's support ticket deflection. We can see that customers who engage with training, who come to training, webinars, workshops, whatever kind of flavor format your education takes, maybe they're submitting fewer support tickets. Maybe they're using your product more or better, and you're able to measure that in some ways sometimes, but maybe it's not consistent, right? If you look at the entirety of what your education is poised to do, maybe we can measure impact in some areas, but not in others. As we progress towards strategic, we're actively measuring and optimizing, right? And we're able to tie to those 4 business outcomes that Anderson was talking about: revenue and growth, retention, performance, and cost reduction. So we're able to say, this is how this directly impacts the business. I can go all the way from what learners are doing to how that changes behavior to how that impacts business metrics. And then we think that there's a future where education has a seat at the table, right? And because we really believe that education is a critical part of how your business operates. And when you think about like competitive advantage, or you just think about how do people be successful with your products and services? How are employees successful in a company? It's because they learned, they adapted, right? They had to figure out how to use your product, how to use new parts of your product, how to change. And education is really a key part of that. And so if we are able to prove that education moves the needle on those business metrics, why wouldn't we then be looking at those education numbers alongside other numbers that your board is talking about, like revenue and retention, renewal rates, and all of that good stuff? So that's where we want to kind of head to, is where education has a seat at the table, but we've got like real-time feedback loops. We're doing QBRs, all that good stuff. So this is just kind of an example of one of those pillars, and going through the different stages of maturity. So you can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. All right. And then Anderson, you want to walk us through kind of a completed scorecard and how we might use that? Oh, I think you're muted.
I just didn't click the button hard enough. Thanks, Shannon. So yeah, once you take that maturity model or maturity assessment that Shannon spoke about, you'll end up maybe with something that you could kind of map to the framework like this. It kind of shows you in each of those 7 areas, here is where your program currently sits. And as I said before, and Shannon noted out, the goal here maybe isn't necessarily to get everything pinned to transformational, but to understand how to prioritize where you invest your time and your resources for your program to have the effect that you need it to have. So it's about taking this information, this feedback, and forming a strategic plan. So you can clearly see where you are today, and it'll help you focus in on maybe where you want to invest to move next. So in this example, maybe your initiative strategy, it's already strong, it's aligned to your business outcomes, but your audience and delivery pillars are still over a little further to the left in the foundational stage. This should give you some focus on where to prioritize. You prioritize on scoping your audience and understanding them better and more deeply, or maybe do you start focusing on your delivery methods and being much more intentional about how you develop content that is going to be delivered in the most effective way that meets the learners where they are. And again, I think it's important to remember that this maturity it's fluid. The program is going to change. I mean, as you add new audiences, you may go from being pretty strategic in your understanding of your audience, maybe down to foundational or even ad hoc, because your audiences have changed. And maybe you're now having to teach and to educate learners that you never really designed your program to reflect or to engage with. Or if you're a customer education program, you may launch a new product and find that your current education program in some of these pillars, it just doesn't work the way it's configured to support that new product. Maybe you are dealing with a new audience and they have no idea that there is any sort of product education for them out there. And so you need to work on refining that audience and marketing to that audience. That's why, well, first, that's normal and it's healthy. You want your education program to grow and change in each of these 7 pillars as the business grows and changes. It should be living and breathing and dynamic, just like the rest of the business is living and breathing and dynamic. Your education program, is not a one-size-fits-all thing. So as the business changes, so does your education program. And that's why we would suggest, I think, taking this assessment and understanding the maturity the maturity model here multiple times. So keep coming back to this and reassessing where your program's at. And you can start to then draw some connection points between where your program was, things that you did to work on these different 7 pillars, then where it is now 6 months or 12 months later. So this is more of a snapshot of where your program exists now. And if you start taking that snapshot over time, now you're getting multiple data points to show improvements or changes or reflections of things that you need to be working on and prioritizing. Because the goal, again, it's not perfection. It's this continual intentional progress towards something that is just more strategic and business aligned with the education, with your education program.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned this is kind of constantly evolving, because I think, like anything, the world is evolving, how we work is evolving. And so we can see where we are today, and then we can see where we progress, but then maybe there are new products, or products are consolidated, or your company has been acquired or acquired another company, and all of that is going to change where you fall, right? And so that's the beauty of it, is that you can continue to grow your program. So next up, I want to walk you guys through just some benchmarks. I'm going to add the caveat here. I am not going to read you all of this data. Okay. It's on this slide deck is below the video, but so you have this. And I'm also going to add the caveat here that this is early data, right? So our goal with this maturity model and with the education-led growth research report is that we'll be able to provide you with benchmarks so you can see where does my program fall compared to other people, what are other people doing, right? We want those numbers. We want to be able to provide you with those numbers. And so that's the goal here. So this is early data. So thank you, first of all, to everybody who has already taken the maturity model, everybody who's on the webinar now who's taken the maturity model, because my notifications are blowing up that that's happening. So that's fun. And hopefully that's helpful to you. But I do want to call out here on the benchmarks, just that most programs are falling in that foundational category. So if you're going through and you're finding yourself largely at that foundational stage of maturity across the different pillars, you are in very good company here, right? You are falling in with the majority of folks. And so this is great. It means that there's room to grow. There's room to continue to prove value and impact to the business. And that's really our hope, is to help you kind of take those next steps. I'll take a moment here to just answer Malachi's question around, like, is it prudent to try and skip a growth vertical, or is this model meant for us to go through each stage thoroughly? And so I'm going to go back to kind of the maturity model overall here. There it is. Okay. Of like, do we need to get to transformational in every category? One, I feel like that could be a moving goalpost, right? Like, to be transformational in any part of your business, really, like, it has to be a full company effort. And I also think, because things are changing, I think our goal would be, and Anderson, let me know if you have a different perspective, to get to kind of the strategic level with each of these, with the transformational being really nice, but that will probably just be a handful of companies where education is really the underpinning of how they work and how they operate. But at the strategic level, in each of these, I think one of the things that we've noticed is when programs aren't as successful as we want for them to be, or as they could be, it's often because we're missing a component, right? So it's like, we really know our audience and we've got killer content and we're delivering it. We've got amazing facilitators. We've set up our LMS to do everything awesome. But then, you know, maybe it wasn't tied to business outcomes, or we're not able to measure and prove that to the business. And if those or we're not marketing and promoting it, right? So this field of dreams, build it and they'll come. If people aren't coming to your education content, they're not coming to training, they can't get any value from it, right? So in order for our content and training to drive behavior change, people have to actually come to it. And so that's where I think each of these is part of a holistic program. But like what Anderson was saying when he was introducing the framework, is it's not sequential. You go through each one, you're kind of going through all of them kind of at the same time, right? So we're probably thinking about marketing and engagement as we're thinking about content strategy and delivery, and we're keeping the audience and business outcomes in mind, and we're continuously improving. And all of this is just kind of working at the same time. So I wish it was a little bit more sequential and straightforward, because that, I think, sometimes would be easier. But I mean, kind of the beauty and the joy of what we do.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, Malachi's question is a great one. And for me, it's analogous to like my own personal professional development. Like, if I just think about if I take a snapshot of where I am in my career and where I want to go in my career, and then I add in, well, what does the business need from me right now? What does my particular function require me to do right now? That starts to help me prioritize what I should be kind of working on first. So there are a lot of areas where I do a great job and just killing it, right? This is product marketing genius. Then there's a lot of areas where I'm like, gosh, I really need to skill up, or I need to get more experience, or I need to get more focused or more strategy around these particular skills or competencies or ways of delivering value to the business. Now, of those, which ones do I work on first and which ones do I continue to kind of like kick down the road? Well, it kind of depends. It depends on what the business needs from me right now. It depends on what our customers need from us right now. It depends on what my colleagues need. So there's a bunch of different factors that help me kind of prioritize which of, with my limited capacity, the 2 or 3 skills I'm really going to work on improving for myself over the next 6 months or 12 months. think our education programs are kind of like that. If you take the maturity model assessment that Shannon has developed and put together, and you get that kind of feedback that shows you, well, I'm ad hoc or foundational, strategic in these different areas, you take a couple of the ones that you maybe need to experience some growth in, and then you prioritize them based off of which ones are going to have the most impact on the business and drive your program forward in moving those business outcome needles. So that's a very long way of saying, yes, Malachi, I think it is prudent sometimes to say, hey, yeah, we know that we can improve in our marketing strategy. But right now, what we're focused on doing is we're focused on reducing employee onboarding time. Everybody's got to take these onboarding courses. So it's more important for us to try to move the needle around delivery and making sure that they're engaging so that they're completed faster and we're achieving the learning objectives in those courses. And then we'll worry about, like, are we marketing this well enough to our employees later? So yeah, I think it is prudent sometimes to skip some if it drives the impact of the program forward in a more strategic way.
I'm glad you added that part. Okay. Kind of jumped into a question there. I'm going to do just a heads up, right? I mentioned earlier, and some of y'all hopped on a little later, that this is the first webinar today in a series. So up next, you're going to hear about the Education-Led Growth Research Report and just some insights from a panel of people on that report. So that's coming up at the top of the hour here. And then I also want you to just go ahead, mark your calendar for Thursday, September 18th. We're going to do a full day talking about all things education-led growth. So if today is interesting to you and you want to dive in deeper and you want to learn more and see what other people are doing with their programs, go ahead and save the date for that. And now I'm going to end the slides and we're going to go into Q&A. So underneath the video is a questions box and you can ask some questions there. Or if you have thoughts to contribute and things that you would like to share with people, go ahead and use that box as well. Maybe we'll start, Pam, you had asked earlier, how can you get C-level buy-in for education-led growth? And Anderson, I'll kick it over.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that this comes back to understanding the language of the C-suite, which are business outcomes, not our educational outputs. So while we may start to build a data story around things like course completions, learner engagement, time spent on a course, number of certifications, those things in and of themselves, while they may be meaningful to us and good indicators that our programs are gaining traction, they don't tell that complete story of why that matters to the business. So part of this is learning how to speak the language of the business. So what does that data all mean for the business? How can we show that the kind of engagement that we've gotten with our learners, the certifications that have been completed, are driving things like cost reduction? Can we show that learners and organizations who engage in our customer education fully, that they submit fewer support tickets? And if they submit fewer support tickets, that means that we're spending less time chasing down support requests that are actually functionality and education requests. So that's one example of trying to tell the whole story there of the impact of a particular kind of education. And it's putting that kind of lens on as like, why is this going to matter to the business? And so it's usually going to be tied to some sort of metric that impacts the dollar. And so the closer you can get to telling a story that impacts the dollar, I think the more traction you're going to get for your education-led growth programs. And using tools like the Education-Led Growth Report, that was written for executive buyers to introduce them to the concept of, that's a different one. The Education-Led Growth ebook was kind of written towards the executive audience to introduce the concept of education-led growth. Education-Led Growth Report that we've put together has great benchmark statistics, and Shannon was just flashing some up on the screen there that can show us kind of what programs are driving at now. The Education-Led Growth Maturity Assessment helps you show where you are. So we're trying to put together kind of a toolkit here to help you develop the language and some meaningful data to take this to your leadership team and to make the case that you can be more strategic, you can map to business outcomes, you should be resourced accordingly. That's those are my initial thoughts, Shannon. I don't know what you have to add in terms of speaking to executives or speaking to the C-suite about getting out of the mindset of like we're a cost center in education rather than an impact driver to the business.
Mm-hmm. I think when you said story, like, yes, numbers, but how do we use the numbers to tell a story? And I found sometimes it's even helpful to pull in an actual example, right? So if you have a customer that you have a lot of data points on, and you can show how education, whether it was decreased support tickets, increased CSAT, maybe increased retention, maybe all of the above, and you can talk and tell that story and put it into real context. And especially if that is a customer that matters a lot to your business, it's a great logo. Anytime you're able to pull in just so, or if it's a partner, if it's an employee, just anytime you can take the data and tell a story and help people to see it in real life, I think is helpful. And when you understand too what matters to your leaders. So I remember we had a senior education leader come in who was kind of talking us through what he had been doing with his program and how he was getting buy-in around the business. And I was asking him, how did you figure out like how to get all these people on the same page and together? And he said, well, typically we talk about things like revenue or retention. And when I was listening to my leadership team and the words that they were using, I heard them just talking about product adoption a lot. And so product adoption is really a leading indicator for things like revenue and retention. People who use our products more or better are more likely to renew, and then probably more likely to expand, maybe even more likely to refer. But he realized like that was the language that they were using. And I think even just listening to the language of your leaders in all hands calls and if you're a public company and you can look at kind of board and public updates, that can help you to understand what matters most to them and then kind of speak to that language. Yeah. So data, stories, language. Okay. More questions. How do you feel about hosting company e-learning on your own learning management system versus hosting through Coursera or similar? I think this actually ties to, if you go back to kind of resources, what I would put under resources is we tend to think of resources as budget and headcount, but it can also be vendors and partners and tools, right? So AI is a resource, and our tools and technology are a resource, and platforms like Coursera or Udemy or LinkedIn Learning, Open Sesame, those like course catalogs can also be resources. So I think it just depends on what it is that you're trying to do, right? First of all, like who are you educating? What are you trying to educate them on? And then, is that something you pull in? A lot of learning management systems will kind of integrate with those platforms where you're like hosting it, but it's like through your own platform.
Yeah, and I would say the way to speak to leadership about this in terms of the evaluation matrix, because that the question here is one that not just is facing education, but that product faces, that sales faces, that marketing face, and that is, do you build, do you buy, or do you partner? And when you're looking at employee education, I think that you can make a strong case for each of those things, but there are different variables that come into play. So if you're looking at industry standard compliance training in your industry, that may make sense to buy or to partner from someone else, because there's no sense for you to reinvent the wheel if there is something that's going to deliver the learning objectives and has the assessment built out, is pedagogically sound, and is compatible with how you want to deliver that education. So it may be much cheaper for you to go buy that through Coursera, deliver it via SCORM or LTI directly in your learning management system, and then track the results for your users. But there are going to be other things that you need to train folks on, even train your employees on, that are bespoke to your organization, because they're about your organization's unique differentiators, or the products that you sell, or the services that you provide. And nobody else is going to be able to, you can't go buy that content off the shelf. And a lot of organizations, if you're training your own employees, you're probably offering like a mixture of those things. And so it's looking at, okay, where do we need to spend and prioritize and allocate the resources that Shannon was just talking about? What can we go buy because it's just quicker and it's going to be cheaper for us in the long run than developing it ourselves, so that we can free up our capacity, our limited capacity in our budget, to go build the stuff that only we can do. And so it may be a mixture of both of those things. But I don't think they're diametrically opposed to one another. It's like, one is better than the other. I think it really is situational. Depends on what your limitations are and what your goals are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the classic, it depends, which is no one's favorite answer, but honestly, the only real honest answer. Okay. Someone had asked, how are people measuring the impact on business outcomes? And I don't have a short answer because, again, it depends. It depends on like what data do we have access to, what are we marrying it to, and how are we analyzing that, right? So whether that's where maybe our LMS is integrated with another system like our CRM, maybe we have a tool like Power BI or Click or Tableau, where we're able to kind of pull all the data together and look at the impact of education on product adoption, on customer retention, on expansion. And sometimes we're pulling all that in a spreadsheet. And so we've written a number of pieces on this. So you'll find on the blog how to measure the impact of education with AI, ways to prove AI that kind of give you some mathematical formula there. What was the other one that I wrote down that I'm just going to send these to you, Leah. And then Gusto came up, their BI team came up with an impact ladder. So if you Google like Intellum impact ladder, you'll find that blog that talks about how they kind of stacked education and how they looked at education to be able to measure the impact. So I don't have a short answer, and that's totally something that we should, I'm going to like write that down to talk about.
And the only thing I'd add to that is like you can start very, very small and simple by just trying to show strong correlations. I think that when we look at telling a data-driven story, that the holy grail for us, right, is being able to use multiple sources of data to show causation. Because we did this, we had this impact. But a lot of areas of the business exist more in the realm of strong correlation. I know, working in marketing, we're in the correlation space all day long. There are some threads that we can show like direct causation, but correlation is usually the story that we're telling. When these things happen, we tend to see these other behaviors or patterns more frequently. And so one of the areas that you might look at is partnering with somebody in the revenue org, part of the organization. And if you're a smaller organization, then that's literally whoever your CRM admin is. And going to that person and saying, okay, I have this list of customers that have completed our training and this list that have not. What I want to understand from you is, do we have anything that shows that one group's renewal rate is different than another? One group's upsell rate is different than another. One group's ACV is different than another. And then you start kind of backing into the impact of education, because that's kind of how you're dividing up your customers. So you can start really, really small to start helping you just speak the language of business outcomes and revenue or cost protection, cost reduction. So that would be maybe how I start. And then if you're not an organization that's got a BI team and you've got an LMS that you can hook into your CRM, or you can pipe all of that data into Power BI or into Tableau, like totally worth working with one of your data folks to kind of start to put together a more robust data story. But like crawl, walk, run with some of this stuff, to start digging into whatever data you can that shows impact.
Awesome. All right, we're going to end with this question here from Jay, and I'm just also going to flash up on the screen to join us next, talking about the education-led growth research, and we're going to hear from some folks in the industry. All right, but Jay's question is, any thoughts on how we handle the eternal conflict, which is not Star Wars and Star Trek, friends, education versus IT and product and marketing? They go to great lengths to portray how simple and intuitive our product is, while we are nearby trying to let them know they do still need training in education. And I don't know, I use real life analogies as often as possible. Like, take it out of the B2B context, take it out of the workplace context, like think about everyday life, gyms, straightforward. Yeah. But no, like how often do you see people doing weird things? You're like, that is not how that works. And they thought it was pretty straightforward. Maybe they had like one little diagram on the side of the machine that was supposed to tell you how it works because it's simple. Yeah. Or like, I don't know if you ever had how do you make a PB&J sandwich? I don't know if anybody else had that science teacher who taught you like, it's like put the peanut butter on the bread, and they like put a jar of peanut butter on the bread. And you're like, oh, maybe this isn't as straightforward as I thought it was. Like, I just think education is just so much of our life. And like, even if something is simple, it doesn't always mean it's easy to apply. And I think like I don't think that having education diminishes something being simple or intuitive. It's just like what's simple and intuitive for one person isn't for another person. We're all coming in with different backgrounds. And so I personally like try to use other analogies and take it outside of the business context, because I just think we undervalue education in general. But
Yeah. Well,
marketing
I mean,
side.
I'm the one, like I'm the guilty party here, right? Like I'm the one that comes up with the value props, like simple and intuitive, and I'm working with our product team on how do you articulate like how easy it is to use our product. And at the same time, I would say that the role for education in that is to help hasten the aha moment or the time to productivity or time to value. Is that, yeah, the product may be simple and intuitive to use, but with some targeted education, we can get them to that value moment even faster. If we get them to that value moment even faster, then we know that we're increasing the stickiness early on. And if we increase the stickiness early on, we know that we're going to up our opportunity to retain them. So even if you're building or you're servicing like a product-led growth kind of motion where it's supposed to be all like just you log in and then the product teaches you how to use it, this is a great opportunity for education to partner with the products team and say, how do we systematically walk people through those first touches so that as they're getting oriented to a new user interface, we draw forward the things that we think are the simplest and most intuitive places, and we make it like idiot proof by using, I saw somebody put Pindo or another digital adoption platform. How can we partner together on using a digital adoption platform in a way that allows us to take the expertise of education, our pedagogy for understanding how people learn, and layer that right on top of this beautiful, simple interface so that we're really closing off any gaps that we might have to someone using the product for the first time. Or, great, it's simple and intuitive to learn how to use for the first time, but let us come alongside you, product, and help you identify where the sticky areas are that are keeping them from full product adoption and realizing full product value so that we can drive them to mastery even faster. So I think there's a lot that education still has to offer, even for a simple and intuitive product. But it really is about not looking at that so much as a conflict and looking at it as a shared goal with different levels of expertise. They're designing and building the product, and you get to come alongside them and help them optimize the user's journey so that they get to that aha moment or that you hasten that time to value.
Awesome. Incredible answer as always. We're going to go ahead. Yes. We're going to go ahead. We're going to wrap up this session, and hopefully we'll see you on the next session to talk more about the education-led growth research. But thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we will see you soon. Bye.